Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. We'll get started in about 30 seconds as participants start to collect on the webinar, on today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. All right, I think we're at total a little over 50 participants. I don't see anybody else collecting online. So I think we should go ahead and get started. Don, please take it away.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I'm Don Chartok. I am reporting out or welcoming you from a beautiful sunny morning in Western Washington State. I'm sitting here enjoying the sun come in my south-facing window right now. This is session 3 of our end of summer virtual meeting. We have had 2 sessions already on compliance and oversight and transit, role, and pandemic. I know I specifically reached out to my staff and had them go and watch at least Scott Gearing's presentation part of that first session. It was really helpful to know what's going on with state management reviews. Today's session 3, we're going to be looking at mobility management, and we have a great panel looking to come up. We have both of those previous presentations are available online. And without further ado, I'm going to hand off to our friend Shirley Wilson.
Good afternoon, everyone. At least it's afternoon for Mississippi. And as it could be morning for some of you. As Don said, that we're going to have a wonderful session here on mobility management, which is past, present, and future, with the idea that mobility management, and it's been one of the areas that we have really had success in Mississippi with mobility management, having mobility managers all over the state that helps us out in Mississippi. But this session will talk about mobility management and how it helps communities and individuals create and manage their mobility options. And we have at least 3 tag team presenters that'll be talking about the how other state departments of transportation are helping manage these programs and planning for the future. As for Mississippi, we have a couple of slides when we talk about mobility management, past, present, and future. We started this thing out with safety loop, and I know some of you probably know what all those initials stand for. So we went through safety loop, we went through MAP 21, and now we're at FAST, and we're still doing mobility management. If you move on to the next slide. We have right now currently working and active 6 regional groups throughout the state, and these are all of their logos here. They meet monthly, quarterly, and they are still very active in mobility management throughout the state of Mississippi and everything. We have 2 dedicated team members that work in the coordination area in Mississippi, working with regional coordination, working with the regional plans. Every one of these regions, they have plans that they update, and they continue to work toward goals and objectives within the state of Mississippi. They are very, very cohesive groups. You can go on to the next slide. And these are our regional group, regional areas within the state. As you can see, they're pretty color-coded here. I wanted to keep you entertained and live by looking at pictures instead of a lot of information. So these are our regional groups within Mississippi and the areas that they are responsible for. And we have mobility managers that are assigned to each one of these regions that works with them. You can go on to the next one. And this is a lovely picture of our mobility managers within the state of Mississippi. As it say, moving forward with mobility managers from Mississippi. Go ahead, O. Next slide. And as a result of mobility management within Mississippi, these are many of our partnering agencies that are continually a part of the regional groups that we have in Mississippi. And not only part of our regional groups, but most of them are also part of our interagency transportation authority, which actually help review and look at our applications and help us make planning decisions and everything. So we are, like I said, mobility management is very active. They're working with us. We have bi-monthly conference calls with our mobility managers throughout the state. We actually receive quarterly regional reports. Our mobility management and managers have a mobility management Facebook page also that shows all the information that's going on within the state of Mississippi. They also work with coordinating summits yearly in their own areas, and they have even transitioned, of course, from not the face-to-face, but also all the technologies necessary to do the virtual training and the virtual meetings also. You can move on. Next slide. And as we have coming to these times with this pandemic, they have shifted gears working with the emergency coordination areas. They are resources throughout the state, our regional planning and mobility management activities to get information out. They're sharing information. They're actually distributing all the supplies and various things and just helping each other out within our regions throughout the state right now. They just recently also helped us coordinate a what we call a technology summit with the CTAA NCAP program. So we're working with how we can look at technology in the future to make sure that we can have safe services. We can still stay in communication with whatever technology is necessary, and also to look at how we can do things smarter and not harder. So and the last slide, I believe, that's coming up. When we, as I say, when we all come together, mobility is at work. So Mississippi, like I said, we're very active. We've been at this for quite a while. I think Safe Delivery was like 2006, somewhere around there. And we continue to see how we are growing within the state. Now, we are getting ready for our panel that we have. We have the first person is Ms. Marion Stock. She's of the Office of Program Management with the Federal Transit Administration. So we're going to start with her first. After that, we'll have some questions. Hopefully, after all of this great information, that they'll have some questions, and you have the opportunity to put them in the chat or the Q&A box here. And then we'll move on to Ms. Judith Shanley and Mr. Jerome Tunason with the National Center on Mobility Management. And we have Maura Moon and TJ Burns with the Colorado Department of Transportation. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them, and I'm sure you all are also. So Ms. Marion Stock, will you go ahead and with your presentation?
Okay, thank you, Shirley. I'm real happy to be here to talk about mobility management, past, present, and future. I think this is really a good time for me to give you all our latest update on the work that we've been doing with the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility, because we have obviously in the past done a lot of work, and it's really ready for you all to use it to take mobility management kind of to the next level into the future. So go on to the next slide. Next. So what I wanted to talk about is to kind of briefly review, because I think a lot of you may be familiar with some of this material already, but I wanted to sort of put forefront in our minds what our Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility strategy is, just review some of the work we've done so far to, which was really about uncovering, how mobility management has been done in the past, and particularly with an eye towards coordination, and so we spent a lot of time prior to 2019 kind of talking to all of you and others about what barriers are present in federal law, regulation, other types of policies that are challenging to mobility management. And then we've taken that and we've produced some products and resources that we think will help you moving into the future. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Next slide. One more. Okay, so just to refresh everyone, the CCAM is an interagency partnership of 11 federal agencies. It's chaired by the Secretary of Transportation, and you can see the agencies that are listed there. They're mostly agencies that can fund transportation in one way or another, with a couple of exceptions. They have most of the agencies, the exceptions are the Social Security Administration and the National Council on Disabilities, I believe. But all the other agencies have some programs that in some way fund transportation for our targeted populations, which are individuals with disabilities, older adults, and individuals of low income. And of course, the CCAM mission is to issue policy recommendations and undertake activities that improve the availability, accessibility, and efficiency of transportation for the targeted populations. Next slide. And a lot of that is done, I should say, through mobility management, which is what we're here to talk about today. So our activities related to the CCAM were in large part defined by these requirements that were in the FAST Act. They asked the CCAM to sort of take us to the next step in coordination and mobility management by doing these things, outlining the roles and responsibilities of each CCAM federal agency in the coordination of transportation, identify a strategy to strengthen our collaboration among the federal agencies, address outstanding recommendations that had been made previously by the CCAM and throughout its history, and those include developing a cost-sharing policy and making recommendations that would increase grantee participation in coordinated planning, address outstanding recommendations that the Comptroller General has made in the same area, and eliminate barriers to transportation coordination, focusing in part on non-emergency medical transportation, but really all transportation to those targeted populations. And we are, as most of you are following along, we are in the process of finalizing a report to the President that will be issued most likely by the end of this month. So we're very excited about that. Next slide. So in the course of doing this work, the CCAM developed a strategic plan that we called Mobility for All, and it was finalized and announced in October of 2019. It covers the years 2019 to 2022. So we are still in the present implementing this strategic plan, and we're really in a process right now, as I mentioned before, of trying to bring these goals and objectives to life. And see them implemented throughout in the field. So they are, as you can see here, improving access to communities through transportation. And that's a lot about figuring out how to address those barriers that we've uncovered in our work so far. Our second goal is to enhance cost effectiveness. And that is somewhat related to some of the products that we've already made available, we think will be helpful with that. As in addition to one product that's still in progress is our cost allocation model that's still in development. But once that's available, we really believe that's gonna make a big contribution to cost effectiveness. We wanna strengthen our interagency partnerships and our collaboration with state, local, and industry groups. So hence my appearance here today. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. And then our fourth goal was to do demonstrations related to coordinated transportation. And we have done some of those over the years. Most recently, our Mobility for All competitive program, I believe 17 projects were funded recently that will be doing some of this demonstrating. Next slide. Okay, so some of the things that we've done so far, and I'm not going to belabor this, but over the last several years since 2016, we've really been gathering information, collecting details, and as a result of that, we have several products I'm going to get into in a moment that we have that we think will really help us take mobility management and coordination into the future. Including the CCAM program inventory and the federal fund braiding guide. So next slide. This is the Transit and Health Access Initiative is the sort of umbrella name for all of the demonstration projects that we've conducted so far, or funded, I should say, because the projects are really being implemented out there in the field. These were competitive programs that we initiated in 2016, 2019, and most recently in 2020. And the name sort of evolved over the years, but essentially these are ways that we're funding projects in the field that are going to help increase access to care, improve health outcomes, and reduce healthcare costs. And so some of you may be involved in some of these projects, and we're looking forward to hearing more about them as they progress. Some of them, they're at various, the 2016 projects, several of them are finished, some of them are actually still going on, and the more recently announced projects, most of them are still just in the process of getting started. Next slide. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we did in the course of our work was to research and gather, and a lot of you participated in helping us do this, the most prevalent barriers to transportation coordination. And as a result of that work, we conducted a series of focus groups in 5 states, not only with transportation providers, but also participating were constituents of the other federal programs involved in the CCAM work, particularly state Medicaid agencies, veterans groups, and others that as a group helped us uncover what these barriers are. And the top 5 barriers to enhanced coordination that we uncovered are listed here. Limited awareness of federal funding sources available, unengaged stakeholders, that sort of makes it difficult to create partnerships if you can't find people who are interested in doing that with you. Program restrictions at times can be barriers, insufficient incentives in terms of financial motivation to pursue coordination initiatives, and the lack of federal guidance in some cases was a barrier to enabling better coordination. Next slide. So what did we do? The first product that I'm going to go into, this is already available on our website. We call it the CCAM Program Inventory. And what it does is, as I mentioned, all of the 11 federal agents, well, 9 of the 11 federal agencies in the CCAM have programs that can fund transportation. But we know that, and I should say specifically transportation for the targeted populations. But we know that sometimes it's difficult when you're transportation, a state or a state DOT or a transportation provider, it's often difficult to identify what those other programs are. You're not always plugged into human services programs and funding opportunities. So we have created this program inventory that identifies the 130 federal programs that are able to provide funding for human services transportation. As you can see, Health and Human Services has 66 programs, way more than even the number of DOT programs that are available. So we have created this. It's up on the CCAM website, and you can look there and see the features, what types of, who's eligible to receive funding, what types of transportation are eligible to be funded, whether or not mobility management can be funded through these particular programs outside of DOT, and there are some that can fund mobility management. And so we hope that you can use this tool to, at least in the initial stages, to identify programs that you might work with others in your community to find funding for mobility management and for coordinated transportation. Next slide. So just to give you a couple of examples out of the 130 programs, this is just listing, some of the programs. In Health and Human Services, there's the Children's Health Insurance Program, Centers for Independent Living, and the Older Americans Act programs that a lot of us are familiar with those. So that the Older Americans Act is probably the most commonly used program that's used in coordination with FTA Section 5310 funding. And then you can see some of the other programs. And basically what this is telling you is that if there's an organization in your community that is receiving funding from, let's say, the Centers for Independent Living program, a portion of those funds are eligible to be used for transportation. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing that yet, but it'd be worth talking to that organization, if you can find them in your community, and finding out what they're doing with their money and whether some type of coordinated transportation would be beneficial for their constituents and potentially could be funded under that program. Next slide. Another tool that we've developed to get into a little bit more, more detail in a way is our federal fund braiding guide. What this does is it's just a document that kind of explains how federal fund braiding can be used for local match in such a way. And what that means is that federal funds from one grant program can potentially be used to fill the local match requirement of another federal program. And so we have that guide available. It talks a little bit more about that. It talks about what programs require local match and what programs are allowed to be used as local match on other programs. And what's important to note is that a project that's going to receive federal funding from two federal programs must meet all the requirements of both federal programs, including eligibility, reporting, regulatory, statutory requirements, anything that goes along with that. Just because you're mixing federal funds, you still have to meet all the requirements of both programs. So we understand it can still be challenging, but we're hoping that through the use of this tool, it just makes things a little bit easier and a little easier to understand what you're trying to do. Next slide. So as some of you know, in October of 2019, we held the first actual CCAM meeting since 2009. The CCAM adopted the strategic plan there, which I just went over the main goals and objectives for. You can also find that on our website. There was discussion about transportation coordination, and we sort of launched the development of the report to the president at that meeting. Next slide. Next. So what we've been doing since in this past year, since we had that meeting, is that we've basically made available the fund braiding guide, and we have also, the third product that we have that is now available is and this is just recently, it was posted in early July, is a cost sharing policy statement. And what that does is each of the CCAM agencies that are potentially involved in transportation coordination have agreed to key principles that are outlined in that statement that will enable cost sharing arrangements to be made relative to vehicle and ride sharing and federal fund braiding. So we're talking about where there can be principles that are specific to how recipients of funding or I guess riders who are participating in programs of different CCAM agencies can ride on the same vehicle, and the funding from each of the agencies that they are entitled to can be used to share the cost of that ride and that vehicle. So I definitely encourage you, if you haven't already, go on the CCAM website, take a look at that cost sharing policy statement, and see how it might be helpful to understand those concepts. Next. Just a couple of additional resources. I think Judy may get into a little bit of this in more detail, but we have a number of technical assistance centers that are here to help you. The National Aging and Disabilities Transportation Center that promotes the availability and accessibility of transportation options for older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers. National Center for Mobility Management that focuses specifically on mobility management, and I'm sure Judy will get right into that. And the National Rural Transit Assistance Program has many, many resources for training and technical assistance needs of rural and tribal transit operators. Next. And again, Shirley mentioned NCAT. I'm very excited about that. That's the National Center for Applied Transit Technology, and they are working on assisting states and local entities to understand emerging transportation technologies, particularly in rural and small urban areas. And then there's also, FTA also funds the Shared Use Mobility Center that discusses equitable, affordable, and environmentally sound mobility across the US. And this PowerPoint has links to each of those TA centers, so we hope that's helpful. Next. Just a few, these are the links. Again, if the PowerPoint is made available, you have the direct links on this slide to the actual products that I've been talking about. And a few other things. The 2018 focus group report gets into the results of those groups where we learned about all the barriers, if you want more details on that. And you can sign up, of course, for GovDelivery if you haven't done so already. Next. Okay, I think I'm going to turn it back to Shirley to make our transition.
Okay. Thank you. Good information. We here use all of this information, and definitely go to the National Center for Mobility Management. And NCAT, the workshop was really good. Even though we were hoping to be face to face, we really enjoyed the NCAT, Andrew and all those from CTAA. But not to hold up anything, if there are questions, I'm looking at the chat. Are there questions that anyone have for Ms. Marianne? Marianne, please. I don't see anything in the chat box. Am I missing anything, Richard? Anybody? Do you see any questions?
I don't see any questions. Oh, actually, we now have a raised hand. Hold on one second. Let me check the participants list. My apologies. Of course, it makes me scroll down. It doesn't put the person who raised their hand at the top. But what am I complaining about? Oh, I'm gonna, Mary Hayes, I'm gonna open up your line. You can talk. Go ahead, Mary.
Hey, thank you. Hi, everybody. And Marianne, happy to be hearing about CCAM again. I had asked earlier and did not receive, but would find really helpful if we could get a list of the agency liaisons from the other agencies, because that would It's really great. We have great access with FTA, but Health and Human Services for our department to be actually trying to get some internal verification that they may be approaching things in a way that would pass muster. It's really challenging for them to understand how to communicate at that level. So I wondered if there could be a liaison list for the other agencies that was shared.
We'll have to develop that, but I guess what I would say is that we are in the process of working on our own, kind of moving from this sort of information gathering phase that we've been in towards more implementation. And with that, we're going to be better equipping the FTA regional offices with information so that they can assist you all in sort of implementing these sorts of projects. And so my expectation is that over, we're not quite there yet, but over the next several months, you'll find that the regional offices are going to be better connected with the regional offices of the other agencies. And that's probably going to be your best sort of source of information going into the future, beyond what NCMM, of course, can provide. But and we'll definitely keep this group posted as we get closer to having our own resources kind of in order.
I just want to take a moment to thank Marianne and frankly everyone at FTA who's been pushing this boulder like Sisyphus up the hill for so many years. I've had colleagues come to me and say, why are you even still working on this? And if we ever get it through, it changes the world. It really greatly improves the system for access and efficiency for everybody. And so thank you very much for continuing to do this work.
And if I could just add my own thank you to people like Don and others who I'm sure are on the call who have really participated and acted as, sort of an advisory committee in certain sense, have brought your examples forward, have made comments, participated in those focus groups if you were in one of those states that was called upon. We just, without having the input from all of you, it would have been much harder, but having that input has been really tremendous. So I thank everyone who has participated that. Even NCMM had done a survey at one point. If you were somebody who responded to that survey, I thank you too. All of that input has been invaluable as we've brought this as far as we have. And we know that we still have work to do to bring it more to fruition, bring it back to the field. And as I said, make sure that you guys have all the contact information that you need to begin to use it more effectively.
All right. Nothing else. We'll move on. And thank you again, Marion. We really appreciate all the information, all the other states that helped out, put all of this information together. So now we're moving on to the presentation from the National Center for Mobility Management with Ms. Judy Shanley and Jerome, we say Tunison.
Tunison.
Got it.
You got it close. You were close,
I almost nailed it.
I've been working with Jerome for a year, so I've got it down. Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Shanley with the National Center for Mobility Management. We're doing some screen share now because we're going to do a poll at the end of my particular section of this presentation, and we want you to be able to interact with the poll. So Jerome is sharing his screen. Don, you said it was sunny and nice in Washington. Well, I'm coming to you from Chicago, where it's not very nice out today. It's overcast and cloudy and a little cool. So I'm glad that you're all with us. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for AASHTO for having this end of the summer virtual event. Seems hard to believe that we're at the end of the summer. I'm going to be talking to you about mobility management, past, present, future. Next slide. I know I see the participant list, and I know many of you have accessed the National Center for Mobility Management's products and services, but I'll just give a quick overview regarding what our project is and some of the things you can access through our center. We are a National Technical Assistance Center. We're in our second iteration of a 5-year cooperative agreement. So we're about 7 years we've been doing this work. It's really hard to believe. And our goal is to promote customer-centered mobility strategies. So it's all about the customer, the end user, the rider, the individual with disability, older adult, person with low income, to facilitate their ability to access health care, economic opportunities, educational opportunities, and really be self-sufficient and inclusive in the society. And we're operated through 3 organizations, the national organizations, APTA, which is the American Public Transportation Association, and Rich Weaver is the director representing APTA on NCMM, and Danny Dries, who I know is on the call with Rich, is an associate with APTA. The Community Transportation Association is the prime contractor in this work, and Amy Conrick and her colleagues are amazing partners to work with. And then my organization, Easter Seals, and Jerome and I represent our organization. Next slide. If you've had an opportunity to access our resources, certainly we can do research for you. We can conduct research for you. We develop products and tools. We develop products and tools that are really based upon the industry needs. And we also can provide or conduct research for any customized needs that you have. I've done a lot of work in New Hampshire and with Marianne in Maine, and we're able to use our national reach to develop products that may be unique to your state and your needs. We've got our blog, Mobility Lines. We also have online events. We have online learning modules, which are really terrific. They're beginner and advanced modules, so they can be accessed at your own time or your staff's own time. And they're at different levels, understanding that people are at different levels regarding mobility management. We also have grant programs, as do many of the National Technical Assistance Centers, so please take advantage of that. It's not huge amounts of money, but usually it's startup, or we have a larger grant program for implementation. So it's a way to get your foot in the door in some of these innovations around mobility management. We also have an online community where mobility management professionals can interact and share in a trusted environment. And we always hope that you can connect with your regional liaison. And the next slide, the way that we've organized ourselves is by region. We have our staff across our 3 organizations who serve as a point person, the point contact for particular states. Oh, I don't know what happened to the slides.
Asking for presentation mode. Okay, there we go.
There we go. So I happen to be the regional liaison for FTA Regions 1 and 5. On the next slide, my colleague Jerome is the regional liaison for Regions 4 and 7. And we've organized ourselves in this way because it really helps us get to know you and the characteristics of your state and your communities, and we could better target our technical assistance by having that information. And I feel like we have great relationships. You know, for instance, Marianne mentioned, how do we identify the federal agency regional contacts? Well, one of the things I've been doing in the Northeast is try to connect the Administration for Community Living, the Administration for Children and Families with the FTA regional office to develop a collaboration so that we could figure out whether any of their programs could support transportation. So on the next slide, mobility management, you're likely aware, is really about creating connections, creating community connections so that there's a cohesive, coordinated system and everybody can access transportation when they need it. And it's focused on the customer, the rider and client, and looking at an entire transportation network, how each of those pieces work together in an integrated way. And the mobility management networks that we work with are really aligned with community needs, the characteristics and demographics of a particular community. On the next slide, you've probably seen this slide. This is kind of the whole premise or foundation of CCAM and the Coordinating Council on Access Mobility. You've got all those places on the right-hand side of the slide of where people have to go. You've got all these different state and federal agencies that have various programs that support transportation in one way or the other. All these federal sectors that have different guidelines, different regulatory, different requirements regarding who can use the service and when. And in the middle of all this massive transportation network is the rider who's perplexed, who doesn't often know how to access the particular service or when. And that's the joy of mobility management. They can help a rider navigate this maze of transportation service. Next slide. I don't have to tell you the benefits. Coordination, you know, usually there's cost savings in the efficiency of transportation, shared funding across agencies. There could be more trips because of this culling of transportation services. And often the services are much more responsive to where people go and points of origin and destination. Could be more safety and customer service because you've got a greater accountability system. And typically there's more flexibility in payment and service when the benefits are coordinated. On the next slide, we get asked often, what's the connection between coordination and mobility management? And we envision mobility management as really a way to operationalize coordination. So human service coordination in states typically has a governance policy. There may be state regulations, state guidelines associated with that coordination. There's a state infrastructure. You heard Shirley talk about her regional structure. Often there's an infrastructure to support coordination, and it requires diverse participation from various entities. And it supposes that the Human Service Coordination Plan is going to be continuously implemented. And we all know that that happens to varying degrees across states. Sometimes it's used continuously, sometimes not. But with a mobility management network, that really creates an opportunity to implement or address the recommendations that come out of a coordinated plan. So you've got mobility managers who are implementing the activities. They're using the infrastructure of a human service coordinated plan to really understand rider needs and connect available services, or sometimes create services. You also find mobility managers are able, because they're at the regional or local level, are able to really engage diverse participation to address the recommendations of a plan. And mobility managers are amazing professionals who really listen to the field, and they try and they experiment, and they ultimately implement various strategies to address mobility challenges. So on the next slide, Marianne, we're so excited about these 3 products that have come out of the Federal Transit Administration, the program inventory, the cost sharing guide, and the cost rating guide, because this gives you an opportunity to connect with your colleagues. Take these products and use them as discussion points with colleagues representing other agencies. You also can use the program inventory in particular to do an inventory of all of those programs that may be available in your state. Not every state has ACF grants or other ACL grants. And so it's an opportunity for you to really take a structured approach to inventorying the resources that may be available. Use it as a checklist and launch partnerships. In a Region 1, FTA Region 1, ACF, ACL, and FTA are more collaborative than ever in working together and thinking about how they could jointly fund programs or have an initiative which has transportation requirements. You can invite representatives of these programs from your colleagues, state agencies, into your programs to serve as advisors, and also work with your regional liaison at NCMM to help you implement these tools. So right now we wanted to do a poll. We wanted to kind of get a thinking on where you are in terms of mobility management, and you should have the directions either in the chat or the text. And the question is, what stage is your state regarding mobility management? A, not even thinking about it. B, very early planning. C, in place and you continue to grow the network. Or D, you have a seasoned network and you're full steam ahead. So take just a minute, and then we'll look at the results, and I'll hand it over to my colleague Jerome, who's going to give you some really terrific research findings that we've undertaken at NCMM. So, Jerome, do we?
Thank you, Judy. And looks like we have 23 results. So keep them coming, folks. We'll keep it open for about another 30 seconds. Alternatively, if you're joining on the phone or via your mobile device, you can text Jerome, Jerom, THEUNIS 588 to the number 22333. That instruction is in the chat. And then text that once to join, and then text A, B, C, or D, depending on the question. So this question asks, what stage is your state in regarding mobility management? A, again, not thinking about it. B, early planning. C, in place and continuing to grow the network. And D, a seasoned network that is full steam ahead. We'll give it another 10 seconds before we close. We're at about 28. You see on the bottom right. And keep some more coming, folks.
Maybe we should have had a response. Don't know.
Right. All right, we'll go ahead and close the polling now, and I'll show you the responses. So I'm glad to see that A is not, there's no one who's not thinking about it. That's very promising. 24% of folks are in very early planning stages, with the vast majority indicating that there's a mobility management network in place and you're continuing to grow the network. And a good 14% of you are saying that you have a full steam ahead network with seasoned professionals staffing it. So thank you for that. And that is really informative for us as NCMM to kind of cater our work to this growing field. So thank you, Judy, for that presentation. I'll go ahead and advance my slides now. And I want to talk to you about implementing CCAM mobility management and coordination at the state level. We recently had the pleasure to work with the Urban Transportation Center housed at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And this is a follow-up report from our findings that we conducted for this mobility management state of the states report back in 2018. And this new report is called Statewide Mobility Management Factors Affecting the Creation and Success of Networks. And we really will set out to document the ways in which statewide mobility management networks are at the forefront of the next generation of delivering transportation services in their communities. Again, this report found that there's no single blueprint for implementing a successful network, and the definitions of quote unquote success vary wildly. But the research and analysis demonstrated that there's a growing body of best or promising practices around mobility management, and that we would love to share with this group today. So typically we've seen in our research has revealed some common features across mobility management networks. The first being there's a balance of top-down support with bottom-up expertise leveraged to meet community needs and leadership roles when it comes to ownership of the mobility management network. Second, there's working within existing or creating new governance infrastructures, like Judy mentioned, and in Mississippi with Shirley's network. There's an infrastructure in place to facilitate the dissemination between federal, state, and local initiatives to kind of create that unique mobility management network that can meet the local customer needs. Also, there's a corresponding communication system that kind of fits that. So whether that be through quarterly meetings or monthly meetings, this is really important to keep that information exchange going and keep that collaboration happening and lively. Also, we've seen networks have diverse multi-tiered participation, so which many different interested stakeholders can participate and have many opportunities for which they can join. Also, internal and external integrative activities include convening stakeholders for cross-sector collaboration and information sharing, or analyzing and planning for regional mobility improvement. These kind of activities kind of make the mobility management come into action and come into results. And that brings me to performance measures finally. Some mobility management networks have really gone above and beyond to creating a framework for data collection that collects performance measures that indicates the efficacy of networks. So number of coordinated trips, dollars saved across federal agencies or state agencies. This is really what the bread and butter is, and the results indicate of a mobility management network. So we want to move towards the ideal network, and just want to give you a snapshot of what today's statewide mobility management networks are growing along, and it's along multiple dimensions. Like I said, collaboration among state DOTs and private transportation providers and human service orgs and community partners alike continues to improve, and we're seeing that through our regional liaison work. State level agencies such as state departments of health are becoming increasingly interested in addressing the social determinants of health, whose primary mission, again, is not transportation, but they recognize that transportation is a means to an end of better health outcomes. And so they're participating in discussions about mobility management. Same can be said for employers as well. Employers are looking at, my employees are not able to get to work, so we need to find a solution to get folks to work reliably and effectively. Also, the awareness of the topic has increased as mobility management coordinators and mobility management practitioners are engaging in more and more public outreach through their employers and as well as in community partners. And that's a really good development to see that mobility management is growing. And again, that final point there is an interest in mobility management as a career path is attracting talent from across sectors. We have the great pleasure at NCMM to work with some upstanding mobility managers across the country. And they're really teaching us also about new things that new paradigms that can be thought about and new partnerships with a diverse range of sectors. So the Mobility Management Network has a double benefit of also kind of creating innovation from within, and that's really exciting. I wanted to quickly go over some peer state mobility management examples. You've heard last year from Ohio, and I'm kind of looking here at different stages of mobility management network development, but Ohio here has built a network of over 29 mobility managers featuring a standardized coordinated transportation planning process, public education on local transportation options, and representation for rural and urban community needs. That creates a truly regional approach. And I think some of the models that we've seen work best have a regional approach to implementing mobility management. Likewise, Massachusetts has kind of taken more of the interagency collaboration approach with Mass Mobility, a joint initiative between Massachusetts Executive Office of Health and Human Services and Mass DOT to increase mobility for seniors, individuals with disabilities, and low-income commuters through information sharing, and regional coordinating councils, those RCCs. So that's, again, that regional approach showing up there. I know some folks from Kansas are on the call. Kansas is one of the states I represent, and in 2010, they had a state law called the Transportation Works Program, which led to the Kansas Department of Transportation developing a regional transportation business model, which creates a coordinated transit district, which is kind of, again, that regional entity. And each of those CTDs has a mobility manager, and currently 3 of them in the state exist. So that's really exciting to see that Kansas is developing that model as well. And finally, a more recent development, Tennessee. Emily and I spoke this morning on the phone for the Transportation Advisory Group in Tennessee, but there we saw the legislature created an Office of Accessible Transportation, a kind of one-stop shop for coordination, and a law that had a coordination mandate included to work through existing human resource agencies, which are kind of these regional resource centers for all things aging, disability, other community resource centers that can bring together also transportation, and that already has an existing structure. And Emily intends to leverage mobility management in each of those to execute that coordination on that state level. So very exciting. And finally, Nebraska. I think Nebraska has a great model under the statewide coordination committee handbook, which the links are included here. But this is a great kind of a flow chart, org chart that shows that the mobility manager is at the fulcrum of coordination in the state. Again, they serve as a liaison between regional committees, the local implementation, but also the statewide initiatives that are kind of larger and that deal with, mid-level management funding, controls, and different levels like that. So it's really important to have the mobility manager there to kind of take that knowledge and that information sharing into action in the regional committees. Quickly before I turn it back over to Judy to finish us out, the ACL, like Judy mentioned, is more than ever interested for collaborations with transportation, and they developed a strategic framework that supports state efforts to coordinate and address those social determinants of health for individuals with disabilities, especially in their families as well. And so this strategic framework has kind of created a operating guide, so to speak, to see how those state agencies can collaborate better and support the individuals that they serve. So that's a great resource to check out. And Judy, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about those other TA centers.
And Mary Ann did briefly, but there's been an increase in coordination across the TA centers at the federal level too. FTA has quarterly calls where we all get together as technical assistance centers and share our resources and share our knowledge in order to maximize the technical assistance resource that FTA has. And each of us, as Mary Ann explained, really has a discrete mission, but there is overlap and coordination across all of our centers. So I'm not going to get into big detail. I want to leave room for questions and discussions. And Jerome, someone asked if you could paste the URL to the study from our website into the chat function. If
Absolutely.
you could do that, please. And I'll turn it over to Shirley. There was just another question. Are the Ohio and other peer examples described as case studies in recent reports? Yeah, you know, they participated as respondents in the study, so there is descriptive information about their various models in both the first report and the second report. And interestingly, we just did a podcast with the University of Illinois, Chicago, with the lead researcher, Dr. Suraj. And so that'll be posted on our website shortly, but we did an interview with him, so he clarifies and goes into more depth of the study topic. But Jerome will, I see Kristen's on, and Jerome will post the URL.
Shortly
So,
after. Thank you.
Thank you all for all of your work in this field, and we look forward to our continued work with you. Shirley?
Thank you all. I appreciate all the information we've actually received along the way and through the years. Mississippi, we use the resources that you have quite often. You might even remember Janice Yancey.
I do, yeah.
She,
love working.
Yeah, so thank you all. I don't see any other questions, so we're gonna move on to our next presenter, tag team presenters, which is Maura Moon and TJ Burns from the Colorado Department of Transportation. And I think you all have an opportunity, if you have other chat along the way that you come up with a question, you'll have another opportunity to ask your questions too, if you have some for the others. Thank you. You all can go ahead. Maura?
Maura, TJ.
Maura?
Hi, this is.
Sorry, guys. This is TJ. Can you hear me now?
We're both trying to unmute at the same time. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought I was. My apologies. So this is TJ. Thanks, Shirley. Yeah, I heard Dawn was in Western Washington. The weather's nice. Not sure how it is in Mississippi. Judy said it was overcast in Chicago. I can tell you that. I can tell you that from Ouray, Colorado, where I am today, the southwest part of the state, it is 65 degrees, sunny. The mountains above us in Ouray and Telluride got a little snow last night. So as mobility management friends, you're all welcome to come visit, but you can only bring one other person and you can't tell anyone else. So that's the deal. But it's beautiful here today, here in the San Juans. Next slide, please, Richard. So we're going to hear from myself, TJ Burr, and Maura Moon. We're both with the Colorado Department of Transportation, to get a little acronym soup out of the way. We work for the Division of Transit and Rail. Brody Ayers is our unit manager. We work for the project coordination unit. Brody's also on the MTAP steering committee, so some of you may have had some interactions with him. This is the actual lovely Maura Moon standing up there, obviously BC, before COVID times. She's holding a state of Colorado map. Colorado is pretty much a rectangle, if you're unfamiliar with that. Also sitting down there with her is Kate Williams, who's with RTD, our big transit monster in Denver. She's the chair of the board of directors there. This was at our last CMAC meeting, which we're going to talk a little bit today, at our CASTA conference. So CMAC is the Colorado Mobility Action Council, which we'll talk a lot more about. It is a subgroup of the CASTA, which is the Colorado Association of Transit Agencies. So that's Maura standing up, Kate setting down two great examples of some leaders within mobility management in the state. Next slide, please, Richard. So once again, we're going to talk a lot about CMAC today. It's the Colorado Mobility Action, I may have said council, it's coalition. It's a CASTA committee. So CASTA is the Colorado Association of Transit Agencies, C.DTR. Hopefully we've got all the acronyms out of the way. We just reinvented that logo last year. Maura kind of led the charge on that. Very bright, as you can see, colorful, fun, energetic, kind of meant to be what we're trying to move toward, which is really moving forward together. So next slide, please. CMAC, the Colorado Mobility Action Coalition. This is our goal, objective, our mission. You'll see lots of buzzwords on this slide. We're meant really, our goal is to be a very inclusive group. You know, anyone involved formally or informally in the state in a mobility management capacity is welcome to be a part of this group. In fact, if we find out about you, we're going to seek you out. So that includes 5310 subawardees, something more I'll talk a little bit more about later, which is our rural regional mobility project. And then others that are just making it happen via some independent effort or just passion of theirs in their specific region or area. You'll see our objective there. One thing I want to point out there is just that peer-to-peer point in the second line. That's really what this group has evolved into and where we've had the most success is just bouncing off of each other. It's really, we have a lot of fun. We'll talk a little bit more about later also. And CMAC really functions as this umbrella for this peer-to-peer interaction for us to gather and do so. As you can see on the mission there, we all really, you know, on an individual or local or even regional level, we share that same mission, maybe even on a statewide effort. That makes this group in particular very powerful and collaborative when we get together. You know, as the saying goes, the collective is stronger than the individual. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit more about CMAC, so up until 2017, which pre-exists my involvement in the effort, CMAC, as described to me, was really a languishing subcommittee of CASTA. They actually it was ran by external consultants, and those consultants in conjunction with CDOT, us, and CASTA, they really struggled to define a successful and engaging model that this group could use. But then we've had success. It's kind of hard to toot your own horn, but that's what we're going to do here for a little bit. Maura came in 2017, and Maura was a mobility manager in the state of Washington. And yes, there is great irony there. It's Maura Moon, mobility manager, or 4M, as we should call her. But she kind of took over the project and got it from a consultant level and brought it back in-house. So it's an internal project now. I actually myself was a mobility manager down here in the southwest part of the state that I described a little bit earlier, and then transitioned to Brody's team, to the CDOT team about a year and a half ago. So getting us, like I said, talking about yourself, a little weird, but getting champions into the fold really kind of helped mold and define this group. And Maura gets a lot of credit for, one, taking it in-house and then, you know, taking it to her vision and growing it from there. So it sounds simple, but Maura deserves a ton of the credit for defining and really evolving the group there. So I don't know how familiar you are with Colorado. You probably know of Denver, which is the metro area. I-70 is the east-west interstate, which most of the mountains you've probably seen on TV or maybe had the chance to visit. I follow along that east-west I-70 corridor. And then I-25 runs north and south, where most of the population lies. So we've got a lot of folks on this call, last I checked, from Colorado. A lot of folks run along that I-25 corridor. I know we've got Alex in Fort Collins, Angel in Boulder. Jarrett representing Denver in the state, Kate representing Denver, Lauren, Colorado Springs. So we've got a lot of urban or population along the I-25 corridor, and then the I-70 kind of forms a T, which more I'll show you a map later. Well, what often gets forgotten is we've got a huge amount of rural transit, just rural area in the state as well. In fact, Colorado leads the nation in rural public transportation with local agencies in areas with fewer than 50,000 residents. We serve more riders than any other state, and we also have RAPTA, which is the Roaring Fork Transit Authority, and that's one of the largest rural transit systems in the country, and that's along that aforementioned I-70 mountain corridor. So I bring that up just to kind of emphasize that the state is very diverse. We have that urban center and the suburban populace along the I-25 corridor there. But then as you go out, we've got some folks on the call from the Eastern Plains, Stratton. I think we have some folks from the Southeast, Lamar, and those are very rural areas. Some folks from my part of the state, which are mountainous, but also very rural and diverse. I know we have Bill and I think Jessica from Durango. So a lot of diversity within the state, which lends itself to a lot of diversity within our mobility management group or our CMAT group as well. That's been really good for us. We like to pick on each other. We challenge each other. We have a ton of fun, very interactive meetings and conversations. Generally, of course, we share a love of the great outdoors and this beautiful state that we all live in. But we're all kind of unified by that common goal of moving people, moving residents no matter where they are. So you can kind of see where we've grown to there. We've got an every other month call, the CMAC group, that has very active, engaged participation of 25 to 30 folks or so. And like I said, these are metro folks to suburban folks to very rural folks to mountain folks. It's a very diverse state. A very active mailing list. And like I touched on a few different ways, it's very diverse just from different areas of the state. But from that diversity, like I touched on as well, we have a lot of fun. I think people are lined up. I often think this, I don't know if it's true or not. It seems like people are lined up to join our group. They don't want to miss our meetings for sure. We typically meet in person around this time of year at the CASTA conference, which was going to be in beautiful Steamboat Springs this year, I believe. But that CASTA conference has gone virtual, so our group will meet virtually here shortly. But we really bounce off of each other. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we've done here on the next slide, please. So CMAC now, what it went from, as Maura really championed the cause from that languishing committee, is myself and Maura, of course, with CDOT. We have the CASTA executive director who's very active and involved and passionate for transit in the state, as you might imagine, but she's the perfect director for that role. And then we have an agency representative who's on the phone now, I believe, with us, a mobility coordinator, Alex, from the Fort Collins area, the North Front Range, which is one of those populous urban, suburban areas. So what Maura and I have developed the group into is we're actively listening, learning, and advocating for each other. We say this a lot when we meet. We know that, especially given our diversity, that not one mobility management project is the same, especially in our state. But we often find that one problem or solution trickles down and it can affect everyone. And we find that from the efforts we coordinate, sure, the presenters we get, the topics we'll discuss, the bigger picture things, but we find as much success just from these almost what I call corner of the room conversations where people are bouncing problems and solutions off of each other and then just having informal conversations by the mere fact that they've been put in a situation with an opportunity to talk to each other. So we share best practices, of course. We use CASTA as a unified voice, or they're our team. They're a lobbying agency to the state. Recently, we've undergone a significant challenge, I guess for lack of a better word, there's been a statewide NEMT brokerage that has been rolled out, had been rolled out in the metro area about, I think, 6 to 9 months ago, but now it's been rolled out to the rest of the state. We're rolling with it. It's been a challenge. As I mentioned a number of times, Colorado is a very diverse state, so having a one-size-fits-all brokerage is difficult and challenging. But through some of our meetings together, through some regional meetings, through some state meetings of the CMAC group, you know, we complained together, of course. We cried together a little bit. We yelled a little bit, but then we learned from each other too. Sharing best practices, what has worked for others in the state, what some others went forward to with this statewide brokerage group and had success with and implementing in their very, very rural parts of the state, and just really learning from each other. So we've got a long ways to go. It's still rolling out, but it's been an example of some of the collaboration that this group is able to lead. And then, of course, it's got full support from the Department of Transportation, from us. Maura and I are actively involved, and as former mobility managers, champions to an extent for the cause. And then Maura is going to talk a little bit more coming up about one of our programs, which is rural regional mobility. I think I have a few more slides before she does that. Yeah, so our goals and action plan, I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. But just to know that we do have one, and it's a group that we're trying to move forward. We're continually evolving and growing and learning from each other, as I said. Continue to grow the membership. Like I said, we invite 5310 sub-recipients, as well as our rural regional mobility folks, as well as just somebody who's doing anything that ties to coordination or mobility management in the state, which we found people we would have never saw it under any listing necessarily. We just found that they were doing that work. So we have an online platform, which will be on the next slide. I'll show you a little bit. It's where we kind of come together and collaborate. Slack, you may be familiar with it, a great way to share news stories, resources, upcoming webinars, anything that's impacting mobility management and transit in the state. We have some work to do on our newsletter. It's kind of ebbed and flowed and evolved. CASTA is our advocacy group with getting through our legislative priorities, and then professional development, constantly or continually, maybe not constantly, offering workshops and trainings through our own meetings, but also facilitated through CASTA. Next slide. This is a little more about Slack. It's I think, fairly typical online portal. I'm sure there are other things like it. You can see on the left-hand column there the various categories that somebody can post something into. All of our CMAC group has access to this within the state. So like I said, we will share, you're seeing there from Sarah Dotson, who I happen to know I work with her. She's in my part of the state in Durango. She was seeking a multimodal administrator. I think she filled it. So in case you were interested, I don't think that's still open. And she did get some interest from around the country. Durango is a beautiful place to be. But you can see the categories on the left side there. Great place to host webinars, project ideas. We have a veterans column. Folks just posting in here as kind of a living, breathing newsletter, if you will. And then we try and pop out an email to remind folks to come in here and check things with some frequency. And yeah. Next slide. So that does it for me. I will toss it over to Maura Moon, who is in Denver. And she'll talk a little bit more about this concept that she's developed that's had a lot of success, which is RRM, or Rural Regional Mobility. And a great picture there to kick this topic off. Very rural look. Go ahead, Maura.
Thanks, TJ. Yeah, so the Rural Regional Mobility Project was really brought in to help bring in additional mobility managers from underrepresented areas of the state. As TJ was saying, CMAC started off small but mighty, and one of the main goals that they had when I joined was to grow participation, and that sort of started this project to see what we could do about creating that equity of funds while also bringing in new mobility managers. Next slide, please. So the way we wanted to do that was sort of the building block of mobility management as we see it, which are coordinating councils, either regional or local. And there's actually a great source here from Dr. Mack about a description of what coordinating councils are. And that is an alliance of community organizations, individuals, interested groups. You know, they work together to identify and fulfill the public and human service transportation needs of their counties. So it's very individualized, you know, it's very specific to the area. And the target populations tend to be older adults, people with disabilities, low-income populations. So that's really where we wanted to start this project at, was, you know, providing an opportunity for areas that didn't have a mobility management program yet to start a coordinating council. So we looked at the FTA 5311 state administrative funds that are given to CDOT that are pretty tricky to spend. There's not a whole lot of ways you can spend them. So we were trying to find a source to allocate to. And our budget for these projects was $24,900 for per year for 2 years. And we would provide technical assistance, you know, through our own work at the state, and also provide some consultant support, staff support, or support through AmeriCorps. So those were our 3 sources of outside assistance so that these projects could be successful. Many times in rural communities, folks wear many hats and don't have an abundance of time to fully commit, you know, to these projects. So we wanted to make sure they had some support. Next slide. Thank you. So this is what the project scopes of work looks like. These 10 things here, and we really wanted the scope of work to be flexible and to be able to fit their specific needs. So what the councils did was they created action plans, you know, based off of these sort of outlined targeted outcomes. And, you know, based on this list, they were able to individualize and see what was going to work best for their community, what was most needed in their community. Just to go through a few, you know, just make sure that they have scheduled meetings that happen regularly, that they were engaging with community leaders. A lot of folks really wanted to focus on a specific cause that could have a measurable outcome, and work on marketing. And also, folks were really trying to create a platform to share services with their communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a quick snapshot of our 3 pilot projects. So the San Luis Valley Regional Transit Council, some of their successes were they built a website of options and resources. They applied for grants, and they really went through the process to elect chairs and form subcommittees. Let's see, the Teller County, their group really wanted to focus on transit advertising through outreach and political influence. So you can kind of see how each different project, you know, they had different specific needs they wanted to tackle. Teller County also did a lot of travel training, and it seemed to be that their project was really focused on a message of encouraging transit and making it a priority at a local level. Southeast Tran, Stephanie Gonzalez, I believe, is on the phone. She really, you know, worked really hard to make that a success. They built a website. They created a printed guide of options. They worked for, you know, enhancing their bus shelter signage. And they really put an emphasis on meeting with local legislatures to have those conversations. Sorry, got muted for a second. Next slide, please. All right, so this first map shows you a snapshot of Colorado with funded 5310 mobility management projects. So this is just going to give you an idea of how the state looked. The areas in green are areas of the state that really had successful funded mobility management projects funded through CDOT and other local sources. The lines on the map are our CDOT intercity bus routes called Outrider and Bustang. And you can kind of see how there were new rural Outrider routes for that rural intercity bus service that didn't have a lot of projects around them. These areas really tend to be areas with higher service levels already in place, you know, already a higher number of providers, higher populations, and more revenue opportunities, either from tourists or just being in a metropolitan area. So this is the first snapshot we saw where we sort of started to realize that our funding wasn't all that equitable. And we wanted to see what we could do to fill in the other areas of the state, which was the whole point of this project. I didn't mention before, but a lot of times what keeps folks in rural areas or areas in general for applying for 5310 funds is they have to come up with that 20% match. And our project was at 100% level, so it eliminated one of those barriers. Next slide, please. This is just a quick glance at some independent projects, areas of the state where folks were doing coordination efforts, not necessarily with or without funds. They weren't, you know, they were run by volunteers, real localized efforts with that. This is just a quick snapshot of that. Next slide, please. And then this map shows our 3 pilot areas. So you have the San Luis Valley over there to the left, Teller County, small area in the center, and then the Southeast region over to the right there. And as you can see, that sort of coordinated with those Outrider expansion routes to help facilitate that, you know, options for getting through those larger areas. And even though, you know, you can see that this filled in some of the blank areas, it hasn't quite filled in all of them, as you'll see on the next map. Thank you. So when you put it all together, you can start to see the picture coming together. And there are some areas that still need support when it comes to funded mobility management or coordination efforts. And that's, you know, that's the goal of the project, is to see where the need is and go out and try to create an opportunity for folks who want to have coordination efforts, but perhaps don't have time to write an application or find local match. This is a way to sort of start and create that jump start so that they feel more organized and more prepared to maybe apply for 5310 in the future. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide. As you can see, we're just trying to fill in the blank areas with new project sites following the expansion of the Outrider intercity bus service. And this is where I will stop to review the chat, see if any questions have come in, or if anyone has any questions for myself or TJ.
So any questions?
I'll start. This is Don. I put it in the chat box, but I'm curious about how you are resourcing this work. I saw that you're using your 5311 admin to support folks in the field, but what about your 2 work, and how much of an FTE do you spend on mobility management, and what's the funding source?
Is that for me, the panelists?
The panelists, definitely. Shirley, if you want to answer it, go for it. I'm curious about the work that Colorado is doing.
Well, that's a really good question. I haven't actually thought about the percentage of our FTE that goes toward this work. It's something that I really enjoy, so I don't really you know, put a lot of emphasis on, oh gosh, I spent this many hours on it. Just kind of it's kind of the part of my job that I, you know, enjoy the most. So I think, you know, if we were to break it down, we meet every other month for CMAC. And then when it comes to this project for rural regional mobility, you know, we had those 3 projects for 2 years. And the oversight that went into that was, you know, it's just sort of an economy of scale with our other projects. When we do oversight or reimbursements, it was, you know, just added on to the, you know, not 60 or 90 some projects that we're already managing. So it didn't feel like a whole lot of extra effort, if that makes sense. That's not a very technical answer. I know Brody's on the phone, he's my manager, he might be able to type in a better response, but and then your other question was, do you support CASTA's work? So CASTA is the recipient of our MTAP funds, so they sort of support us, if that makes sense.
No, that was actually, you answered what I was asking. Support them with funding, and so you do with RTAP.
Yes, yes, they receive our RTAP allocation.
This is TJ. I would add to that first answer that we have 4 folks who cover the state, Maura and myself, and Brody's actually a working manager, and then Glenn. So as projects like these develop, they're assigned, or basically not even assigned as much as those people that are already working with those agencies in their area. You know, one of the 4 of us, we kind of take on the project, and it really just kind of falls in line with some of the work we're already doing. So it's not just Maura and I, it's really whoever's already in that area developing those relationships, working on that coordination, they kind of naturally inherit these projects.
Yeah, thank you, TJ.
So we have 2 questions from attendees and participants that would like to ask over the phone. I'm going to open their lines. Actually, Marianne Hayes, you're first. You can actually unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I'm saying that chat isn't available to me, so I don't know if a lot of people are having that problem, but.
Well, this is just an announcement. I'll make the announcement. For chat function is not available for participants. It's only available for the panelists. If you have questions and you want to submit them online, we're happy to send them in via the Q&A function, and we'll ask them of the panelists, but please go ahead.
Yep, and so my question is on a similar line. And so are all your grantees transit providers? So with these 3 pilots, did you open it up to others to apply, or are you keeping it within the subrecipient family?
So some of them were already subrecipients. So Teller County provides service with 5311 funds. They just weren't doing a mobility management aspect yet. And then the other 2 areas were not subrecipients yet, or currently, I should say. One of them, the San Luis Valley folks had received 5304 planning in the past. So they were in our system already and at that sort of thing, but they didn't have any current projects. And this is not an application-based process. This is us reaching out for technical assistance. So these are not folks that needed to sit down and apply. Kind of what I was explaining before, removing those barriers. We wanted to remove the barrier of an application process, local match, kind of make it as simple as possible to bring those folks to the table. That's why it's only for 2 years, and then really encourage people once they feel more set up for success to then apply for the 5310, which is competitive mobility management funds. But these first 2 years of technical assistance it really comes from us reaching out and finding those areas that we think need our technical assistance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a hand raised from Chris Eilinger from CTAA. I'm going to open his line. Chris, go ahead.
Okay. First, an apology. I think I have Infrastructure Week happening right outside my window here. So if there's background noise of construction equipment, my apologies. But I have a two-part question. First of all, big picture, and this is probably one that Judy is in the best position to respond to, possibly offline or maybe through Richard through MTAP, is I'm curious how many states currently have really kind of vibrant ongoing networks of mobility managers, sort of like CMAC, because I've seen that ebb and flow over the years. And I know of a few, and Shirley, you had your presentation as well as this great stuff from TJ and Maura. But for Colorado, I have the specific question of, I see the two of you have been part of the mobility manager to state DOT workforce pipeline, which is really cool. What are you doing to make sure that there is an ongoing, thriving, non-burned out, staying employed network of mobility managers in Colorado?
TJ, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that lends our group a lot of energy, a lot of relevant experience. Of course, mobility management is an ever-evolving concept to some extent. So I think I touched on it. There's not one program, even in our own state, that is exactly the same for a lot of reasons. So I think one of the things we do, I mean, it sounds obvious, but we get the group together in one way or another, and we chat every other month. Like I said, we utilize CASTA to meet in person, hopefully soon again, and then have a lot of fun. We bounce a lot of things off each other. We get a little silly, a little goofy. We have things like swag expos or giveaways or something. We'll have all the mobility managers bring in stuff that flyers they've worked on, buttons, shirts, anything cool that they've created, bring it in. We'll pass it around, trade it, and then just try to stay active, engaged, even with the reminders we send out. Try to stay positive, highlight something that someone in the state has done that may not otherwise be known or get recognized if it's not shouted out through this collaborative effort. So really just trying to stay on top of it, and I guess at least from my perspective, and I'll let Maura answer next, but just trying to keep that constant energy, keep that infusion. We've got great leadership with Maura, but also great leaders in the state. I mentioned Kate, Angel, I think they're on the phone, Alex, some of those folks along the Front Range corridor. They've been doing it for a while, so they've got great ideas. They're seeing new things as their population explodes, so we're learning from that. Even the rural nature of the state, the population in most of the rural areas is growing. People want to live here. So we're learning things from those folks all the time through these new programs and bringing new people in through things like rural regional mobility. We get fresh blood, new faces, new areas. That brings us energy and new things to talk about, new problems, some of the same problems, solutions, et cetera. So constantly evolving, and I think given the state of Colorado and it's just pretty much upward arrow of growth trend, it gives us a lot of natural, just energy and enthusiasm, and then we're going to continue to grow, growth to work off of. So, Maura, you want to add to that?
I mean, I think you did an awesome job. I can't think of too much more to add that you didn't already cover, other than we can't take too much credit. We just really have an amazing group of folks here. I suppose, Slack is really helpful to share best practices, but really I think what gives folks new energy is when we get together at our CASTA conferences that happen twice a year. So this year, is especially tough for everyone. Conferences aren't happening like they used to, but that was really a special time because, there's really strong relationships and friendships and a lot of respect throughout the group, and it's always rejuvenating to see each other in person. So I would really recommend that as a best practice, when it becomes safe and able to happen again.
I believe Jerome from the National Center has one more additional poll that I think is going to be kind of cool. So I'm going to send out to everybody on the webinar right now the link to the previous poll, and I'll let him describe it more. Jerome?
Yes, Richard, if you don't mind unsharing your screen, I can share mine.
I will.
Richard just posted in the chat the polling screen, the polling link here. And the question that we're asking this time is, what is the greatest value that a mobility management network can bring? And the responses will show up in a word cloud as folks answer. So please head to that link and in 1 or 2 words, say what value that the mobility management network that you see brings to your state. Glad to see it's populating slowly and but surely. I see.
All right, I'm going to consider. We've done a whole lot of things. This is like the coolest thing I think we've done. So we're not known for cool.
I love the fact that
cool.
someone said equity and ideas. I mean, you get this group of diverse people together in a state, and the innovation that comes out of the collective thinking is amazing.
So we will be sharing this word cloud with everyone after the presentation. I'll forward it to Richard and he'll post it on the MTAP website, but this is really great. Thank you all for sharing.
Hey, that's neat.
That's it. I'm stealing this
That
function. I'm totally stealing this function for one of our future meetings and future webinars. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Jerome.
I like that.
Of course.
Hey. So, I don't see any other questions out here.
Shirley, this is Judy. Chris Seilinger asked a question about the pervasiveness of mobility management networks, and I typed a response in the chat.
Okay.
In our first study that we did about 1.5 years ago, we had 21 states respond, and 14 of those indicated they had a structured mobility management network. And I bet if we go back to those same states, they're at a different stage right now. So please share with us. We love learning about what you all are doing so that we could use that learning to help others grow and learn. So if you go through the 2 reports and you see something omitted, please contact us and we'll certainly update it, and we'll reflect the great work that you're doing.
Chris from CTA raised his hand. So Chris, go ahead. Your line is open.
Oh, my apologies. I had forgotten to lower my hand before.
Oh. Then shame on you, sir. Shame on you. Thank you, though.
Right.
Marianne Hayes, go ahead.
I really lowered mine and raised it again, and I did put it in the Q&A, but I am interested in Mississippi, even if Washington State already knows everything going on there. So Shirley, how do you fund your mobility managers?
They're actually funded out of the 5311 program. In the beginning of the planning process, when Safety Loop actually came out and made a requirement for the 5310 program, we made it a requirement for coordination, and all our providers, anyone that actually applied for funding, would have to be a part of the coordinated planning process. So our 5311s were just as active as our 5310s. So, and they actually came all in and decided that they would be the lead agencies to actually mesh all the groups together in their region. So most all of them are funded out of 5311 funds, and they, like I said, they lead the whole regional coordination effort.
Thank you. I think the trick with all of these is expanding what can be done with the same amount of money we have to give them just becomes competing priorities.
Well, they've been very cooperative, and I mean, they work really well. Like I said, the MDOT started the effort by setting up the whole regional planning process soon as we got the guidance from in Safety Loop, and they've been pretty cohesive since then, and they considered a priority. Mobility management really helps them throughout the state to gain partners and to actually make more funding available through all of these partnering agencies. Any other questions? All right.
Oh, Mary Ann's got a hand raised.
Sorry, now I'm back to performance measures. I just wonder if someone might be able to collect examples of all these great, there's been a lot of references to strong measurements and data being collected that's persuasive in demonstrating the efficacy of investing in mobility management. And I'd appreciate any samples if there's a way Richard might be able to collect them, or I'm not sure how.
Mary Ann, this is Judy. We'd be happy to put that together for you. We have some resources that we've already produced on our website, but we'll look at that to make sure that it's current and share with you any tools that we've collected over time that the states are using to measure the ROI of mobility management. Because as what was said before is, you know, if you've got mobility managers around the state collecting data regarding their outcomes, that reflects on the state investment. And so in one state in particular, I know that they use those measures at the regional level as a way to continue to validate to the legislature about the need to invest in mobility management. So we'll compile that. We'll make it available through the NCMM website as well.
Thank you. I think we talked about this 2 years ago at the partnership conference, but the trick is getting to outcomes if you can, and not just outputs of numbers of calls, numbers of rides. If there's a way to get beyond that, it would be really awesome.
Exactly. And hopefully we're moving in that direction. For those of you who are interested in performance measurement, we've been trying to help the field think about not just the output, so that a number of rides, an increased number of rides were provided, or an increased number of riders are using a service, but really trying to engage in performance measurement where we're trying to identify metrics associated with better health outcomes or economic outcomes or life outcomes so that you could assess the impacts, not just outputs.
I'm not seeing anything else.
All right, last chance, everybody. If you have a question, please, at this point, I guess, feel free to just raise your hand. I'm happy to open your lines or use the Q&A box. Let me just check the questions and answers we've had so far and see what we've gotten. I think we did pretty good on answering every. Whoa, hang out.
Well, okay.
Well, we have some Angel Bond. Thank you for an engaging discussion. Well, we appreciate the comments.
All right. And I want to say the same. Thank you all for all the questions and the answers and the participation from the panelists. This is always an interesting topic to me because as I said, it's been really a process that really has helped us in the state here to work into actually gain more partners. So I appreciate all the information from all the panelists, and I think that's it for us, Richard, unless it's something else.
Yeah, well, just want to thanks everyone for participating in the end of summer 2020 virtual meeting. This was week 2, session 3. There's one more session coming up on Thursday at the same time to talk, and that's for the, I guess, for the techie audience. The audience like to talk about transit technology. But if you have any questions about the Council on Public Transportation or MTAP, please contact Shane Gill. He's our Program Director for Multimodal Transportation. His information is on this slide, as well as please contact me. I'm the Associate Program Manager for Transit Policy and Technical Assistance. We'd be happy to help you. Otherwise, everyone, we ended early. We're 15 minutes early, so I'm really glad that we were able to share this time together, and I'm hoping everybody has a great rest of your day.
Right.
Take care, everyone. Talk to you on Friday. I'm sorry, Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.